Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. Tonight there's no video for our listening party, just audio. In a few minutes, we'll start the interview that I did with Joseph Sanok of Practice for the Practice. And you can feel free to join in on the group chat via Google Hangout, or you can also submit a question anonymously, and I can address that via the group chat as well. Looking forward to hearing everyone's questions tonight, and I hope you enjoy the interview.
Is on the show. Shenandoah Sheffalo on the show. Gonna rhyme like I got the flow because my name is Joe. And anyway, that was pretty good for not writing anything down. So Shen is just a local celebrity here in Traverse City. She is a master networker. She's done so many amazing things. I just want to read a little bit of her bio she sent me. She sent me an extensive one so that I could kind of pick and choose. But she's been building networks of professionals, politicians, agencies, organizations, social workers, foster care alumni, and others interested in creating new solutions and ideas to a problem that affects not only foster care children, but the whole system. And so she is doing some outstanding work around foster care, and she's a former foster care. She is a foster care alumni, so she's been in foster care. She goes really deep in her just talk with me about just like what life was like in foster care, what she wants to change, and it's amazing to just hear all that she shares with us. So I'm gonna not take anything else away from her because she just has so much to share. Without any further ado, I give you Shenandoah Sheffalo. Shenandoah, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
Good, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is great to have you on. You know, we both live in Traverse City here, and you've been doing a lot of really great work, and I'm just so excited to have you on the show today.
I'm so excited to be here, and I've got a beautiful view of Long Lake this morning.
Oh, man, I have a beautiful view of West Bay, so that's great. So tell me a little bit about your story. Who are you?
Well, Shenandoah Sheffalo, obviously. And currently, I am hopefully an author soon.
All right.
As I'm waiting for the news. Any day I could get the email, Joe, so I'm excited.
Yeah, we were just talking before the show started, and I said, let me pause your story because I think that we should just record this. So tell us a little bit about the project that you're working on and how people are saying you should write a book, and then maybe we'll springboard from there.
Sure. So in about 2011, I decided to transition. I had been working in law office administration for about 20 years and was coming a little bit frustrated with the circle of people that I was seeing, you know, coming through the criminal justice system. And so started looking into coaching. And in doing that, a bunch of people had reached out and said, the only way to be successful in coaching is to write a book. And I said, oh, that's great. I'm not an author. And so writing a book is not in my wheelhouse. That's never going to happen. So I'm going to have to find a different way. And so in doing that, I was setting up and looking for material for my website, trying to get good content. And I was becoming really frustrated with my own biography on my website. I just felt, you know, I had written 1,000 attorney biographies for their websites before. And I just felt that there was really no connection in my biography, and that the thing that set me apart, I was having problems putting into my biography. And so I was complaining about this over coffee with a girlfriend one day, and she said, you've really got to meet my brother. He used to be a journalist, and I think he could totally help you with this.
Oh, that's an awesome connection.
Right. Just kind of out of the blue. She's like, I know exactly what you're saying. You need to have connection with your audience. So I sat down with him and we met, and he said, oh, this is an easy project. Let me just interview you like I would a famous person for an article I'm writing, and we'll come up with something. So we set a meeting. It was supposed to be about a half-hour meeting. It ended up being 2 hours. Because we started this conversation on my childhood, because he just kept asking more and more, right, investigative questions. And he became more and more fascinated with something that I thought was pretty common. I didn't think it was special in any way. And he said, have you ever thought about writing a book?
Mm.
And I was like, no.
You're like, other people have thought about me writing a book, but not me.
Exactly. And so for about a week and a half, he kind of really pestered me via email and said, just give me like 5 pages and I'll tell you if it's good. So I sat down to write these 5 pages, mostly to make this man stop emailing me, because I didn't feel like he was going to stop. So I wrote 5 pages. The 5 pages turned into about 70 pages pretty quickly because it just kind of poured out of me. And I sent it to him, never to think about it again. About 2 hours later, I got a response email where he said, can I have 70 more pages? Because I want to know what happens next. And so that was kind of the birth of the new book, Garbage Bag Suitcase, and my journey of actually doing less and less coaching and more working and speaking and talking in kind of this arena of foster kids and kids at risk in general with people. So it kind of spun me into a whole new direction.
So for your own personal story, I imagine you had to really kind of say, well, what do I want to capture here? What do I not? I mean, you could fill, volumes and volumes, we all could, of our own story. So what were some of the stories that kind of, for you thought the audience would resonate with? And maybe tell us just a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, so the story is really a memoir and a narrative nonfiction kind of merged together, in that what people are really fascinated with, right, is the accident that they can't take their eyes off when they're passing. It is the train wreck. So my life, I'm talking about the dysfunctional journey of my kind of nomadic childhood. I went to 35 schools before finally graduating from high school. And so it's talking about that nomadic journey and the craziness of living with someone who's mentally ill and has drug and alcohol addictions on top of that, and then going into the foster care system.
And how old were you when you went into the foster care system?
I was 13 officially when I officially went in. I was probably homeless and kind of couch surfing for about 8 months before that. So, yeah, so it's going through the foster care system, questioning yourself on if the decision to go into foster care was the right one, because I actually called the authorities on myself. So it was a conscious decision, and then of course questioning whether that was the right decision for a number of years, and looking at that. And then the story really is about this girl who's just looking for somebody to love her at any cost, and what that looks like. And so what I was struggling with in the book kind of transitioned at some point was everyone around me kept saying, well, what's the happily ever after? Everyone wanted this Disney story of me finding my biological parents and reconciling with them and having this fairy tale ending. Right?
Yeah.
And that I knew that wasn't possible from the day that I set out on writing the book. I never knew how the story was really going to end. And what happened is that in this journey of writing the first half of the book, I realized there was a better way for the foster care system in general. Mm-hmm. So the second half of the book is talking about really this real cost of foster care, the lasting impression it makes on your life, and the way, foster care alumni treat food, the way that they treat relationships, the things that just kind of never go away, that you kind of just learn to deal with as you go.
So for counselors that aren't familiar with foster care, I was a foster care supervisor, so I know some of kind of what you're talking about. But like people that don't know, what are some of those foster care alumni things that just don't go away? Like you said, food, like what kind of things?
Well, so food issues are huge, and almost every foster parent that you probably will meet will say this, and it's probably the number one question I get asked by foster parents, which is, so how do I deal with these food issues? Now, it becomes complicated because they kind of come out in different ways with different kids, right? Because we're all humans, and so it all comes out differently. For me, because there was such a lack of food when I was growing up, and that food was very much a reward punishment sort of system, is that, I was a very skinny child. I was, probably underweight 90% of my childhood. And then once I was on my own, I just had no idea of how much was too much, because I was so afraid that, right, as a kid, you just ate because there really might not be a meal for 3 or 4 days. So you'll eat as much as you possibly can when it's presented to you. But when you bring that mentality into an adult life where you're now taking care of yourself, it can quickly become a problem, right? Because now I have food every day and I can have 27 meals a day if I want. So if I still have that same mental issue with it, it's something that you have to kind of overcome and realize. Now, for me, it wasn't so much just about eating, but it was about like having a stocked pantry. Like I just had to have over and above. So if beans are on sale for 10 for whatever, right? 10 for $10, Shen has to buy like $70 worth of beans just in case we have an apocalypse.
Well, it's funny because it's like those kind of mentalities, they come out in different ways, not just in foster care. Like my mother-in-law, when she cooks like any pasta salad or potato salad, she can't like half the recipe. And so when we had moved back to Traverse City, we stayed with them for a bit, and she would make this vat of like pasta salad, and I would be eating it every day. And one day my wife just said to me, Joe, you don't have to finish the pasta salad, because in my family of origin, it was like clean plate club. Like you finish the leftovers before you ever make something new. So I'm like, if I ever want to eat anything new, I gotta eat the pasta salad.
Yeah, it's the same thing. And so it's just trying to retrain your brain, but understand where those come from. And so I think with foster kids, it can get confusing because, right, we have our biological families where we learn things, but then we go to various other families where we tend to pick up those habits too. So now you're trying to peel back not just the layers of your own childhood, but the layers of like a lot of childhoods almost.
Yeah.
Because you're getting a different experience at every place.
And it's like, who's the adult influencer in your life? Whereas like I had my parents, Christina had her parents, and then we have to meld those two families. Whereas you have all these adults that, or maybe lack thereof.
Exactly.
And most foster kids that I met, it was like they trusted themselves first and then the other adults like second or third.
Right. And so if you're a parent and of any child of any age, right? Do you want your child to trust only themselves?
Right.
Right? I mean, as a parent myself, it's like, I don't think I want my 13-year-old to only trust her own decision making. I'm not confident in her decision making at this point.
What are some other
100%.
Such a good point. What are some other commonalities with foster care alumni? Because I think it's important for counselors that maybe haven't worked with foster kids or kids that are alumni or even full-grown adults to understand some of those things.
Yeah, so I got a list. I was actually just talking to another alumni who was a NASA scientist for most of her career, right? So she was very successful in her life and has been doing some really great things. And we were just talking about how we both enjoy giving gifts to people.
Oh, shit.
But that.
All right.
I'll move less, I promise.
All right. Well, welcome back. So you were just talking about how, and I think it just cut off when you were leaving the room there. So. Okay.
So what I was saying is that we both feel like foster kids in general are really good gift givers, and most of the alumni we know are people who would give you their last dollar. They're really giving, but what we're really poor at is gift receiving, right? So it's this idea that it makes us uncomfortable. We're not sure what to do. We never feel like we have the right reaction. And is there something linked to this gift? Like, am I expected to do something because I got this gift?
Oh, wow. Like, I never would have even thought about that, like, kind of tit for tat side of it. But it totally makes sense, though.
Right. Well, because you didn't get a lot of gifts as a foster kid. And so, at least in my previous life before foster care, I didn't receive a lot of gifts. So you just kind of never learned that.
Yeah.
And so, although you really want to make other people happy, and logically as an adult, I can say, well, people are giving me these gifts because they want to have that same feeling I have when I give gifts.
Yeah.
I just don't have that same feeling in my stomach that other people do when you give them a gift.
Right.
You know, it's very kind of uncomfortable, and I'm never sure. You know, still as an adult now, it's always like, oh, you know, I'm very appreciative of it. That's not it. It's just like, there's still that voice in the back of your head that's saying, okay, what's this attached to?
Yeah. So I guess I have a question about foster care and transitioning through your teen years into being a successful adult? Because I look at you, I never would have guessed like that you had this kind of tough history. You know, it's like,
yeah.
But and I mean, you look at the statistics of percentage of kids from foster care that graduate high school or graduate college and that are
it's atrocious.
Homeless by age like 22, and I mean, just through the roof. But you.
Well, so yeah, California says that they claim that over 95% of their prison population is made up of former foster youth.
Wow.
So when you just think about it in those terms.
Right. So I see you as a really successful, strong woman. Like, what happened between leaving foster care and now that maybe helped you, or that, like, what advice do you have for any other either kids in foster care or counselors working with people transitioning out of foster care?
So it's funny that you're asking me this. I just did a blog post that I haven't quite hit send on yet before I started talking with you today. And it really is, have you asked the question? And it's my call to social workers and caseworkers and counselors and all these people that are working with kids, which essentially is have you asked the kids what they want? And I think a lot of times, especially with foster kids, right? Nobody's bothered to ask them what they want because everyone's so busy planning what they need.
Right. Or because of the state regulations that funding are tied to, like you have to go through these 7 domain areas and talk about these things. And the kid's like, I don't care.
Right, exactly. And what kid does, right? And so social workers often are tied up in doing paperwork.
Right.
Because it's a governmental agency. So nothing can be done unless we have it in a form.
And usually like a 60-page form that doesn't format correctly.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, and they have 300 other kids, right? You're not their only kid that they're thinking about to do these forms for. So, I mean, we have way more kids than social workers. So, you know, the kid is often just forgotten about. And then you have stereotypes that play in, right? So if we have foster kids and they're clearly disadvantaged and they're not capable of anything a quote normal child would be capable of. So because maybe they're not getting straight A's because they've moved schools 13 times in 6 years, they're not college material, right? So all of those professional jobs are already in the minds of social workers and caseworkers and judges, maybe not intentionally, but they've already started saying, that's not a good fit for this kid. Let's start looking at becoming, you know, a plumber or, you know, an electrician or a contractor. And then you start getting them into, well, how could we just get them employed? Versus what do they want to do with their lives? And so I talk about it in this new blog, which is I had a social worker who came into me to do some coaching. And she said, I feel like when I have a kid who's failing school and I say, well, what do you want to do? And he says, I want to be a doctor. I feel like I have a duty to have him become more realistic about his dreams. And I was really shocked when she said it. And I mean, I understand and I get it, but aren't we supposed to be kind of the curators of the dream? Why is it our job to say that's not going to be a fit for you? Shouldn't we say, okay, if that's what you want to do, then here's the steps.
Yeah.
And then it's their responsibility whether they take those steps and live up to it or not. It's not our responsibility to say, well, that's not for you.
Right.
And let's talk about something more realistic.
Well, and so often, especially with, you know, kids in foster care, if they experience severe abuse at younger ages, you know, their development isn't always, you know, say they're 18, they may be emotionally 12 or younger. Like, how much would we say to like my 4-year-old, you know what, you want to be a unicorn when you grow up? Like, that's just not realistic. Like, we would never do that to a younger kid.
Exactly. And again, they may have to go through more steps, right? If they want to be a doctor, it may be more difficult. There may be more hoops that they have to jump through. They may need to spend 2 years in community college. Right. They may need to spend a year just getting their grades ready for community college. Right. But shouldn't we be helping to cultivate that so that they can see these things are possible? And I think when I look at myself in my life and everybody says, well, what's the one thing? There is no one thing. And we're human, so it's different for everyone. But the thing is that I knew at a very young age, the only way out was college. And perhaps because no one around me was going to college, and that was kind of this, I didn't even really know what it was, but I thought, well, that will get me somewhere. So I think this idea of just having a big goal that seems unreachable. Now, I got good grades through school, but coming towards the end, I had a guidance counselor who, this is no joke, said, people like you don't go to college. People like you serve the rest of us.
What?
Because that was the expectation.
Oh my gosh.
That someone like me who got decent grades, I wasn't, I was never going to go to Harvard, but, I could get into a state school. I should just get a job and get ready to just become a maid, become a cashier, and do that. That was, in his mind, what foster kids did. And so I had a physics teacher who offered to pay my application fee because I couldn't even afford to do that. And if I applied to her alma mater, which I did, Michigan State, and by and large, I got in. When I got the acceptance letter, this is no joke, Joe, I thought they made a mistake. I called the admissions office and said, are you sure that I got in? Because I was so convinced at that point that I would never go to college. Right?
Well, you were just told by your
down.
guidance counselor that you were going to serve the masses.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, waitressing is not a job I could ever do.
No. Oh my gosh. I did serving for a summer, and then I switched over to catering, and that was a little bit easier. But as a profession, those people work so hard. Holy cow!
I know, and I could never do it. Okay, so let me just be clear. It was not a job I could ever do. So, I think it's just trying to get people over these stereotypes that we have of care and that they should stand for X, Y, or Z. Now, on the flip side of that, should every kid go to college? I mean, I think this is a question we're having in society right now about regular kids, right? Mm-hmm. So is everyone destined for college, and is that the answer? I don't know, but my point is we should be facilitating the dreams of these kids.
Yeah.
And I think in at-risk populations, that's the biggest thing. Mm-hmm. I was having a conversation yesterday where sometimes, if you're talking about poor communities, sometimes the big fantasy dream is, I would just like to have a steady job as a contractor and have my own, mobile home or trailer, right? Like, because they've been homeless most of their life. So even just having that seems like a big dream, that they can't even imagine something beyond that. And I think our job as just a society and a community is to encourage and help those people have experiences to shift their ideas so that they can see there's even more than that that's available.
Mm-hmm. So when I was working at the community college, I helped do a program that was aimed at helping foster kids and other kids from at-risk populations transition into college. And I think one thing that was tough for me as a counselor or case manager is that there was so much going on beyond just that individual kind of interaction. I mean, I could even meet with them like every day, and there would be so much extra going on that I would have no clue was going on. Like, yeah, for the counselors, case managers, social workers that are working with like young, say 20-something or late teens, what advice do you have for them as to how to best connect with kids that are coming out of foster care?
Well, I always say meet on their turf, right? So you have to kind of be where they are. So meeting in places like the counseling office might not be the best idea, because we've been to a lot of therapy, and I'll be honest, at least in my experience, a lot of it not good, right? Where it's very detached, where you can't say anything you want because it's all getting reported to someone.
Right.
It's getting reported to a judge, to a caseworker, to your foster family. Like, that's not an open and honest relationship with a therapist or counselor. And so I think a lot of kids coming from those situations are already a little doubtful about those adults that are helping, because nothing's really feels like it's helping, right? So the other thing is that I find those types of kids are interesting because they're fairly independent on one hand. They've been taking care of themselves. They can do tasks. They're surely filling out more forms than most kids their age can do, right? They've been doing those things. But on the other hand, emotionally, they're not necessarily 19 or 20.
Yeah.
So I just had a gentleman who said he took a bunch of 17, 18, 19-year-olds out into the woods, right, for camping experience. And then he thought, well, this will be great. They've been living in their cars and on the streets. Like, camping should be fun, right? They'll have a great time. And that he said it was like being with a bunch of 6-year-olds suddenly when they were in the woods. Because emotionally, they're just not at that capacity to understand what's going on.
Yeah. I remember I was working with this one kid through our Sail Champion program where we took foster kids out sailing.
Yeah.
It was a number of years ago, and he said to me that on Saturday mornings he loved to get like just a sugar cereal and watch like cartoons. And this kid was like 16, but it was because in his early elementary years he was taking care of his brothers and sisters. He was moving foster homes. He was like trying to reclaim his childhood and like just watching cartoons on a Saturday morning. And
yeah, because he's finally in control of his own life, right? For the first time. And he hasn't done all of those things.
Right.
So those things that we take for granted, you know, most of us, a lot of these kids haven't even experienced. And this is what I'm saying about the dream, is that they haven't experienced sailing. So how do they know whether they like it or not?
Right, right.
You know, so as I got older, I would say to my husband, oh, let's do all these crazy things. And he's like, why do you want to do this? Like, I wanted to go horseback riding, right? And I was like, because I've never done it, so I don't even know if I like it.
Right, right.
Right? Like, I never felt I was good at sports, mainly because I wasn't ever allowed to play. But then as you get older and you're like, well, what do you like to do? Mm-hmm. I didn't really have an answer to that for people because I'd never really done anything. Right? So I would say, well, maybe I'm just really good at things that are like rich people sports. Like maybe I'm like the world's best polo player, but none of us ever found out because I didn't get an opportunity.
You're great at squash.
Right. You know, these weren't things that were available in my community.
Yeah, we don't have an adult kickball team here that I know of.
Exactly. Maybe we should.
Oh, that would I wouldn't mind that. You know?
Foursquare.
There you go.
Yeah, so it's just, you just haven't had these experiences, you know, of playing on the soccer team because I couldn't afford to play on the soccer team.
Right. So I guess, so you're then working in law offices and you decide to launch your coaching business. So let's fast forward a bit because I really want to hear about that because I know you've really done a great job with that. And then you transition out of coaching and doing more speaking. I think that's also an area that a lot of counselors just really are interested in. So maybe take us through some of that story and process.
Well, I mean, it's just kind of what unfolds, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm a big believer in never forcing anything. That if it's supposed to be, it just kind of naturally happens. And so that's what happened. This gentleman wrote my bio for my website and I put it up on my website and it was the most read page on my website, right? So that's interesting. Yeah. You just like start to think about that because I would think, and I don't know the statistics, but most people's biography or about us page is probably the least read page, people spend the least amount of time on it. It ended up being the time people spent. And what happened is that a woman in Sweden ultimately contacted me and hired me for coaching. So I was coaching this woman in Sweden who then led to all these clients in India. So I was doing, all of my clients ended up being international clients. And so I was doing that, but people kept hearing about this biography page. And so then they wanted to know more about that. They were less interested in coaching and more interested in the story. So just a natural, well, can you come talk to our women's group about this? Can you come, right? And so for me, it originally started with this twist on my theories of coaching, kind of law of attraction stuff, and all of these things that have helped me heal a lot, right? And helped me kind of grow in my own person. And I would try to weave those in, but by and far, when people at the end of the talk would say, okay, are there questions? Everyone wanted to know about care.
Right.
Right? They wanted to know about that transition and how that occurred for me. Excuse me. And so that became the story.
Yeah.
That people wanted to hear. And so that transitioned into more talking and more people saying, hey, can you come talk at the Human Rights Commission? Because there's not a lot of people, and you know this from working with kids, who are willing to share the story.
Right, right. Well, and I just read this book, Talk Like TED, where they take the top 20 TED Talks and they look at all the stats and like they kind of like take the science of what makes them the top TED Talks. And overwhelmingly, the ones that are Hello?
Hello, Joe, are you there?
Yeah, I was put on hold.
Okay.
That's okay.
Okay.
Hey, so overwhelmingly, TED Talks that are story-based, that have 50 to 60% story to make their point, are the ones that are most viewed. And I think it like goes back to just like our early human mind, like sitting around a campfire and hearing stories and then learning from that. Like, it's still compelling. Like, even this podcast, most of it's been you just sharing your story, and then we pull points out of that.
Right. And I think, you know, people connect with that, and people want to know, and right, so it's the most asked question. Well, what made you successful?
Yeah.
It's the most question. And I always say there's not one point. And that's what I kind of want to drive home, is that we have to remember, I think, when we're dealing with people, that anything you learn can't hold true for everyone you come in contact with. Right? So we're still individuals.
Right.
And so I think that's maybe one of the things counselors and social workers and me and everyone could really take away, is that everyone's an individual. So even though we might have learned these skills and these things that can work for a lot of people,
yeah,
they might not always work for this one person.
Right.
And so we have to be willing to do that, you know, and try new things and put ourselves out there in ways that may make us uncomfortable. This book for me is the way that makes me uncomfortable. Right.
Well, I think people want to be able to take a story like yours and say, okay, here's the process or the system that I can pull out that I can implement in my life. And that's not always able to happen. Right.
Because, you know, you've read books and you've thought, gosh, this person's done these great things, let me try it. And it just doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I didn't want to write a book. Right? And so you try and it's not going to work sometimes. And so you have to try something else. And I think that's the one thing that foster kids, that society in general, is like, we're afraid to fail, and somehow we're criticized if we try and fail. And for me, I would rather try and fail than just sit and do nothing.
That's, you know, when I was planning leaving my full-time job back in March, the big thing that I kept saying to myself is, will I regret staying and not trying and just feeling safe and secure in this full-time job? Or will I regret trying and failing more? Like, which one's going to be the bigger regret? I realized that sitting in a full-time job and not giving myself the chance to maybe go beyond what I thought I could go beyond, like, that was going to I was going to die every day that I sat in that full-time job.
Right? Yep. And so that's the thing, like, usually our mind will immediately go to the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And so I do this a lot with clients who are just stuck, which is, okay, so tell me what the worst case scenario is, right? And so then they start on it. I'm like, okay. And then, like, what if you don't get that group of clients to pay you? Like, let's keep moving through all the possible worst cases. Well, I could become homeless. And so then right, because that's like usually the worst case scenario whenever you're talking about these things, because you'd have no money, and then soon you'd lose everything, and your wife would divorce you, and your kids would hate you, and you'd be homeless, right? And then I always say, so you would allow yourself to do that. Like, nowhere along that process would you say, gee, I should get a job at McDonald's.
Right.
Like, you would just allow yourself to completely lose everything. And once we kind of work through this worst case scenario, most people are like, yeah, you're probably right. I wouldn't just allow myself to do nothing. You know, I may give up on the dream temporarily, and I would go do something else. And all of these terrible things happen. So once you kind of work through the worst case scenario, then it's like, oh, this is doable.
Well, and for you, it's like you have a superpower, because you've been homeless and you've been in foster care, and you've realized, not that that was good, but you survived. You know, you got through it. And so helping people go through those worst case scenarios, I can imagine, is a really powerful exercise.
Yeah, because what's going to happen?
Right.
I mean, we're usually afraid of nothing, right? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I mean, what is it we're afraid of? And it's ourselves. And usually it's, we don't want to let people down, right? We're connected in this human emotion to other people. We're afraid people are judging us. We're afraid that they don't like us, that we're doing something to offend them. What if nobody's thinking about us at all?
Yeah.
Because they're so worried thinking about these same things in their own life.
Right, right.
But usually they're not thinking of us.
Yeah, we put a lot of kind of, I guess, narcissism on ourselves, that the world is really kind of watching us and cares that much.
And you know, maybe for a small majority of people that are on television, right? We don't have to name names.
People like you and me.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's the case. But I think by and large, people don't really care what you're doing.
Right, right.
Right? Axl Rose said in a song, right? I don't care what you do, just don't do it to me. And I think that's probably pretty
I love that you
for most
quote
people.
Axl Rose. That's awesome.
Right? Well, but it's true. It's like it's the ultimate Axl Rose one-liner. I don't care what you do, but just don't do it to me. And I think that's how most people feel.
Right, right.
Like, do whatever you're going to do as long as it doesn't involve me. I don't care.
Yeah. So I want to hear more about, so you have this 70 pages, and then there's somewhere between 70 pages and actually launching a book. Like, fill in some of that. Like, where are you at now? What are you exploring? Just so that, because I think there's a lot of people that are listening that are like, I would like to write a book someday, but it's like, in the same way I'd like to go to the moon. You know, like.
Right. Well, so I already said I'm the accidental writer. Like, I didn't set out with this. So it took me 4 years. It could probably take someone else a lot less time. But in honesty, there were a lot of times when I thought, this is really just a self-indulgent endeavor on my part. And I kind of was annoyed with myself during the process, where I would spend months where I wouldn't even look at it because I was just so sick of it. There was another part, right? Because I had to relive some pretty painful things from my own past, where I didn't know how I wanted to approach it. I didn't know if I wanted that story to necessarily be included, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know if I wanted to talk about those feelings. So for me, a lot of tears and a lot of pain and a lot of meditation to get me to a point where I was finally like, okay, I can talk about any of this. And truthfully, it wasn't that the book was cathartic, which I've heard a lot of authors say when they've written about these kind of traumas in their life, that it was kind of healing and cathartic for them. More so for me, it was kind of like perhaps like the final time I had to really think about it. Because once it was kind of down in words, just read the book is kind of what I could tell
Right,
people,
right.
you know? And I didn't really have to talk about it in graphic detail. And then what kind of blossomed out of it for me was I could write an ending that talked about the changes I wanted to see in the world. Mm. And for me, that's what finally became enough of the push to finish the book. Mm-hmm. Because for a long time, I struggled with the ending. As I said, everybody wanted this fairy tale ending, which I knew couldn't happen. So how do you in the book? Because I'm still alive, right? So
right.
How does the book end?
Well, and it's not authentic to most foster care situations either. Like, it's, you know, you see these movies of kids in foster care and then everything's perfect. And it's just like,
right.
Come on. Like,
right. I never got my Daddy Warbucks, right?
Yeah,
like,
the
he never
after-school
came
special.
in to save the day, like he did for Annie and Sandy the dog. Right? When I was a kid, that was the only person in foster care.
That was your role model.
Right, Annie. Yeah, that never happened. Still waiting for Daddy Warbucks. So I really struggled. And so the one thing, like one of the reasons I stopped watching news in general, like, and I don't care what news station you watch because it's all the same to me, is that they're really good about complaining about something, but they offer few solutions. And maybe it's just the government in general and they're just reporting on that. I don't know.
I think that's a great observation, because I see that even outside of the news, you know, like even like with consulting clients or even audience members here, you know, it's like people will say, oh, my private practice isn't thriving. Okay, like, what are you going to do about it? Like, are you evaluating your SEO? Are you looking into ways to market? Are you finding new clients? Like, what are you going to do about it? And so it's so much easier to complain than to find solutions.
Okay, so this was my big thing. And I mean, there's plenty of complaining in my book, right? And not so much for me, but just like, I think anybody reading it can be like, okay, well, that person dropped the ball. Like, you can just make that observation on your own. You don't need me to tell you, right? And so I didn't want it to just be the scathing review of the foster care system and how terrible it is. a lot of people know that. And if they don't, part of my book is to educate them so they can see these interconnections between these other systems. Because again, this is coming back to me. I'm a big believer that if we don't fix foster care, we're never going to fix the criminal justice reform that President Obama was talking about earlier. I mean, that's pointless in my mind if we don't fix the fact that, well, 90% of the prison population is coming from the foster care population. Perhaps we should look there first, right?
Yeah.
And welfare system and homelessness. Like for me, those problems will never go away until we first address this problem. And so that was kind of the emphasis for the second half of the book, which is, so what do we do? And I spent a lot of time because I'm not a social worker, right? I've just had I've had an interesting life where I've been a foster kid, and then I worked in criminal justice and I saw all of that. And then I became a foster parent for a short time and I saw that and the challenges there. And now I'm this person telling the story. So I get to have this kind of unique 360 view of the system as a whole.
Yeah.
And I get what people are saying in all of those respects. So what happened was, I said, what would have been the best thing for me as a kid in foster care? Like, what would have been the ideal situation? Because I knew, at least in my opinion, foster homes are not the solution to this problem. First off, we'll never have enough homes for the amount of kids that we have. We're over 400,000 kids in care. They're claiming by the end of 2015 will be close to 500,000 kids in care every day. We'll never have enough good quality foster homes to meet that need. So going down that avenue to me seemed fruitless. So I just was really thinking, like, what would be my perfect thing? And so doing work and talking about, well, like, who's successful in the world and what did they have? Because after all, that's what we're trying to do, is make people successful, right? Like, at least for me, this idea of boarding schools really kind of popped in, that, hey, all these people who are getting into the best colleges in the nation are coming from these private boarding schools. Even when I started looking at college football players, right, that are coming from these urban areas that everyone's going in and recruiting from. And then I started realizing, well, some of these kids are spending a year at this school in Virginia, getting ready for college. And I started just kind of investigating that and got myself on this idea of doing a boarding school for foster kids where security and stability was the #1 priority, and that they could create families. Because I think that's one of the really lacking things, is that when you're a foster kid, you're kind of supposed to forget about your first family. But that's always, for me, that will always be my mom. That will always be my dad, no matter what.
Yeah.
Good, bad, ugly, or otherwise, right? If you ask me about my mom, that's the woman I think of.
Yeah.
Right? Is my biological mother. So, how do you, even if they're not going to reconnect with those people later in life, like myself, well, then who do they get to spend the holidays with?
Mm-hmm.
Who becomes their family when they move? Who's going to help them pack up the boxes?
Yeah.
Just those tasks that most people with a regular family just kind of count on their family being there for, right? Like when they get married, who's sitting on their side of the aisle?
Yeah.
Right? That's a thing that, like, we don't think about. Who's there supporting them? And so it was this idea of creating a family, and so started looking at things like the Hershey School in Pennsylvania and what Milton Hershey had first started and what that's kind of become, and was fascinated with what they were doing. Didn't have anyone leaving me a Hershey fortune to start that school, unfortunately.
I'm guessing most of those people have diabetes that go to that school. I'm kidding.
It's actually a really interesting. They have so much money that they will tear down buildings that are new because they have to spend down this trust, because
oh my gosh,
I for all the schools.
Sounds like a good partner.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
So then what I found is, in this process and doing research, that schools could really be the key. And I got hooked into things like the ACEs study, if you're familiar with the, adverse childhood experiences, and how could we bring that into schools? And then really got hooked up with this awesome school in North Carolina called the Cross North School, who is a boarding school, but they have a charter school on their campus that all their foster kids attend, but is also open to the kids in the area. It's a charter school, so their parents can elect to have them go there. And so they have this really great mix of foster kids and just regular school kids. And they're using an ACEs trauma-based model, and they are having fantastic results with, you know, something like a 98% graduation rate, which is more than most high schools, private or public, anywhere.
What was the name of that school?
The Krosnor School, Crossnore. You can go to the krosnorschool.org. They are just doing, they basically were all the ideas floating around in my mind in a model.
Sure.
So now we're talking about doing that in Northern Michigan. There's some great opportunities that are opening up, and schools that are floundering, that are needing some guidance and ideas of ways to go. And so, you know, I'm lucky enough to live somewhere where people get it and want to support. So
that's awesome. So when it comes to the book, what are kind of what's the next 6 months look like for the book?
The next 6 months for me is number one priority, building my email list for people to get information about kind of the cause and what we're doing. And so I love this. So I can use that as leverage with agents. Anybody who's written a book, I'll tell you, maybe my next career will be fixing the publishing world. It is the weirdest business model I've seen anywhere. Yeah. I've never seen a business model like this. So
what do agents look for in an email list, just so that listeners can have a goal if they're shooting for a book?
Yeah, they're looking for your platform, right? I mean, this is why we keep getting more and more books published by celebrities, I think, than anything else, which I think is a shame. But
are there certain numbers in the platform they look for, or
obviously
the more the better?
I think it depends. Yeah, I think it depends on your niche and what's there. This is the whole business model of the publishing. Do they think they can sell books? Period. Yeah. So what's your niche? And they're really curious to know. And how many people in your niche do you have on a list, right? If you have 100 people, that's not a lot of books. You know, if you have 10,000 people, we're a lot more interested.
Sure.
Because if you've managed to get together 10,000 people, which is kind of the magic number, I think, they think, well, with some real marketing and, you know, getting you to these right things, we can exponentially grow that without much effort. So that also shows them that there's somebody who's probably interested in what you're saying.
Sure.
And how else can you test that currently?
Right.
Because people don't buy books like they used to.
No, they don't. Well, that's good to just kind of know about building a list. And I think that it also puts a big spotlight on, you know, the way that you and I connected for this podcast was you just sent out an email to kind of your friends and family that said, hey, this is a project I'm passionate about. I've been working on it for a while. Here's just a quick summary. Like, if you want to join the list, here's my goal. You had very specific numbers as to, I want to have this many people by this date, this many people by this date. And I emailed you back and said, hey, you want to be on the podcast? Because I think you have an important story to tell. And so often we're so scared, especially as counselors in private practice, of reaching out and just asking for what we want. And
so that's my number one thing. You said the magic word, Joe, ask.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you don't ask, the answer is always no.
Yeah.
And this is what I say, and it kind of comes back to our fear conversation. If you don't ask, the answer is no. So what's the problem with asking? Like, so I sent that email to a bunch of people, right? Some people didn't respond. Some people said no. So be it. I don't take that as a personal dig on me. It's like, they're busy people. They have lives, right?
Yeah.
And then you'll get people like yourself and a few other people who say, hey, let's do this.
Yeah.
Right? And then you're like, perfect, because that's all you really need.
Yeah, I mean, you think about that ask. If everybody says no, and then you get a podcast interview and a couple other people on the list, you're ahead of where you were.
Yeah, I mean, because I'll just go through my email list. So if like you've ever sent me an email asking for something, you're probably going to get an email from me one day saying, great, now help me do this, right? Yeah. So like, because I was a coach, I had been on lists for like, you know, people who are looking for people to come present at workshops and kind of do those things, right? So I sent an email to a guy who is always marketing me about paying him $49 to be on this list. And I said, hey, I'm doing this. So in his blog that he sends out marketing to people, he just kind of mentioned it in the bottom of his blog,
that's
right?
Awesome.
Like, you can't, that's free. I mean, you can't
that's
get
awesome.
better than that.
Well, Shenandoah, what's one thing that every counselor in the world we're listening right now, you would want them to know?
Yeah, this brings me back to this article and this blog that I'm going to be putting on, and that's just ask. Ask what the people around you, and I say this for yourself, for your family, and for the patients or the kids that you're working for. What do people really want? Ask that question. What do you really want? What does your spouse really want, or your significant other really want? What do your kids really want? And when you get the answer, try to let go of all your judgment about what you think they need, right? Just let's start having conversations about what you want. Stop with the how's your day going? Oh, good, it's sunny. And let's talk about, I want to build a school that's going to serve, 10,000 kids and really make an impact and difference in our schools and our lives and in our communities.
Wow.
What do you really want?
Well, Shenandoah, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you if they want to connect with your list or want to just hear about the work you're doing?
I would love for them to connect with my list. They can go to www.garbagebagsuitcase.com and sign up for the email, learn about book launch information. We're going to be doing awesome special events and special promotions through there. That'll be only for email people.
Ooh.
I know. Always.
Yep.
They always get the best. Those who give their email address get the best.
They do. I do that as well.
And then they can always contact me. All my contact information is up on the website. They can contact me through social media. I'm really about connecting with people. I can't ever imagine changing that about myself. Yeah. Even if the book, I should say not if, when the book becomes a New York Times bestseller.
There you go.
I still enjoy one-on-one connections with people.
Yeah. Well, we'll have links in the show notes also to all of that. And I'll make sure that this podcast goes live after your blog post goes live. So we'll link to that as well.
Awesome.
Shenandoah, thank you so much for your time today. This has been an awesome conversation.
Thanks so much for having me, Joe. I really enjoyed it. If you're still listening, thanks for listening to the podcast. I plan on staying on just for a little bit here if you have any questions or if you wanted to chat about anything you heard in the podcast or something else. Otherwise, you can find me, as I said in the podcast, at my website, www.garbagebagsuitcase.com. You can always email me at shen@garbagebagsuitcase.com. And I'm always on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. You can find me here on Google+, and hopefully we'll have some more hangouts soon with interviews or questions or live chats, kind of as we think of things. So if anyone is still listening, please feel free. If you have questions, again, you can pop them up there in the group chat or on the sidebar. There's a Q&A if you'd rather just submit a private question. I'll hang out here for a few more minutes. And otherwise, I'll see and talk to you guys all soon. Thanks.